Developing a Terraform provider is about creating connections. You're connecting users of Terraform with your platform, either a platform that you're of a company you're employed at, or maybe it's a platform that you rely on for your workflow so that you want to be involved with the project as well to make sure that the provider connects you to Terraform. But the development of that provider also connects you to those developers who are willing to help out, willing to get involved in the open source side of things. And so you make those connections to make sure that your provider provides the use to your users and also to the developers that are maintaining it with you as well. Now here at PagerDuty, our Terraform provider has maybe a unique story, or maybe it's a story you've heard before. But what I want to do is take you through that story, through our journey of our Terraform provider and how it started, how we took over for that development of that provider, and then also the lessons that we learned while we went through that process. The story of our provider actually begins back in 2016. There was an SRE engineer in Sweden named Alexander Helbom. And Alexander had adopted PagerDuty at his company. And at his company, they were also using Terraform to manage all the different aspects of their infrastructure. So when Alexander got PagerDuty, the first thing he looked for was whether there was a provider in Terraform. When he discovered there wasn't, the next step he took was, well, are there requests for this thing? And so he found in the issues in the Terraform project that actually PagerDuty was a highly requested feature to be added to Terraform. And so like every other good engineer, Alexander went into the documentation of the PagerDuty API, saw that there were the necessary endpoints to handle the different actions that he needed. And so then he dug into the development documentation for working on a provider and thought, I could do this. I could make this. So he dug into it and created a provider. And now back in those days, in 2016, providers were actually part of the Terraform project. So when Alexander was going through this process, and when he was going through opening this pull request, he actually got everything ready and got to the point where he needed to click on the button to open the pull request. And he was nervous. He was a little shy to do it. In fact, he needed his fiance at the time, now his wife, they have a couple of kids. She clicked the button to open the pull request to add the PagerDuty provider to the Terraform project. And it's a good thing that she did, because the project now has over 40 contributors, hundreds of users using it every day, and they're making millions of API calls through our Terraform provider. According to HashiCorp, the PagerDuty provider is actually one of the top 20 most used providers in the whole registry. So all because of the actions of one person, really two, right? She was the one who helped him get the nerve to get it over the line and get it into the provider, or the provider into Terraform itself. We're grateful for that. And so are the many users who use the Terraform provider for PagerDuty today. Alexander continued to maintain the PagerDuty provider for years. Up until 2019, he was managing and developing and reviewing pull requests and addressing issues all on his own, and with the help of the other members of the community who also helped contribute to the provider. But he was the one kind of running point on everything. He was managing it and owning it. So in 2019, things changed a little bit. We as PagerDuty started to get involved just a little bit. I joined PagerDuty in 2019. And as a brand new developer advocate, I was excited, eager to impress. And so as I made the rounds, getting to know people around the company, trying to learn like what needed to be done, what did our developers need? The people who were using our product, what was the needs that a developer advocate that could provide? And I met this person named Julian, and Julian asked me if I was familiar with Terraform, just in general as a platform. And I said, sure, in concept, I understand its infrastructure as code and it provides a tool to allow people to do that, but I never used it myself. And he said, all right, well, we have a Terraform provider for PagerDuty. However, we have not gotten involved in the project. In fact, it'd be really great. There's this new feature on our API that we'd love to get into the Terraform provider. And it would be really great if the company was the ones who got involved. If an employee got involved with the provider. So when I got into this, I thought, all right, let me see what I can do. So I did the same similar actions that Alexander did. Took a look at the documentation, took a look at Alexander's code and the rest of the code that the rest of the community put together in managing and creating the PagerDuty provider up to that point in 2019, and thought, maybe I could do this. I've always kind of wanted to learn Go, and this would be a great opportunity. In fact, I've heard a lot of folks, this is how they've learned Go, is by getting involved with Terraform provider development. And so while I was thinking about these things and planning and setting up my development environment, I decided I needed to make a connection for my own. And I reached out to Alexander and made a connection with him. And he and I started an email conversation that went back and forth and helped develop a relationship between the two of us, where he was able to trust me. I was able to trust him. He provided great feedback on my questions that I had about developing a Terraform provider. And so it was great to get that personal connection with the owner and the creator of the PagerDuty provider. So we got some information out of him, but we also wanted to give something back to Alexander. In that, we were able to bring him into one of our conferences. You see him here in this picture. He was recognized as the community champion in 2019 for our PagerDuty users because of the work he did with the Terraform provider. I loved recognizing the efforts of someone building open source software, but especially Alexander and how he built and maintained and managed the PagerDuty Terraform provider. So Alexander continued to work with me, continued to help me get started on developing this provider. And eventually, I was able to make my first pull request. And that was to add these event rules, this new event rules API endpoint into the Terraform provider. Adding the event rule resource was how I got started into developing the PagerDuty Terraform provider. And Alexander helped me go back and forth a little bit, but as he gave me feedback, he was always so constructive, so positive in helping me understand how to best do things and how Go worked and how the different libraries for working with Terraform providers worked. And he was telling me all through this time that he and I went back and forth, and he was teaching me that that's one of the reasons why he stayed involved with the project. He stayed involved and got involved because he had all this positivity that he gained from the community. People in the community would help him. They would encourage him. They would be positive in helping him understand how to best develop this provider for PagerDuty. And so because of that positivity, Alexander was motivated to be that positive with other people, and especially with others who are making contributions to the provider. So he and I went back and forth again as I made this pull request, and this pull request was the beginning of many that I had with the Terraform provider for PagerDuty. And it got to the point, our conversation finally led to a point where Alexander one day was like, so, you're getting involved with this. You understand what's going on now. How about, you take over? And I agreed, because let's be honest, PagerDuty should be responsible for PagerDuty's Terraform provider. What I also learned throughout this conversation is that Alexander had been supporting this Terraform provider that he created in 2016, but by 2019, he changed jobs, right? We all changed jobs. 3 years, that's not so bad. But within that time, he went to a new company, and that new company wasn't even using PagerDuty. Alexander was maintaining a provider he wasn't even using every day. How awesome is that? It shows to his character on how he respects the community, but also respects the fact that he takes pride in the work that he's done and making sure that the project continues on. So now that we're at this point, Alexander started to feel maybe this is time I can hand this off. Maybe I can hand this off to PagerDuty, or at least to Scott at PagerDuty, and it will be in safe hands and will be something that will be supported and continue on. So our journey that we had as we took over the provider We learned a ton of lessons. I learned them specifically, whether it be code. I learned how to develop in the Go programming language. As I mentioned, it was a new thing to me, but also with process and culture and trying to get ideas in the minds of the people that I worked with, and to honestly sell, in a sense, the idea that we needed to support this Terraform provider, that this Terraform provider was vital to our users and ultimately to our company. So some of these lessons that I learned, I hope to share with you today so that you can understand what you can look forward to, what you can look out for, or how you can best navigate adopting a Terraform provider at your company. So the first lesson that I learned is I needed to get buy-in. Buy-in at a company basically means that you need to do that with data. You need numbers to let people know, why is this thing important? When I first got involved with the provider, I was telling my team, hey, there's this thing called the Terraform provider. And most of them were like, yeah, I know. And I was like, well, it's new to me. And so as I made a few pull requests, they thought, oh, that's great. He's getting involved with open source and with a project that's, dealing with PagerDuty and helping our users and our customers. But then I started getting more and more involved. And so then I had to justify, why am I spending all my time on this Terraform provider? And then as I got involved, I started realizing, should a developer advocate like me, who normally doesn't work with production code, should I be the one responsible for this? I'm the single point of contact for this Terraform provider. And when things go wrong, I'm the single point of failure. So we need to have some kind of metric, some kind of data to let people know that we have users that are using this Terraform provider. So in that first pull request that I made, where I added that event rule resource, I also added one more line of code. And it's this line right here. I added a user agent header to every API call that we make, that the Terraform provider makes to the PagerDuty API. That user agent header identifies every call that's coming through the provider and allows us on the PagerDuty end to see in our logs, okay, now we understand how much traffic is passing through this provider. Who is using this provider? We can now tie it to specific customers. We can tie those customers to dollar values. At the end of the day, we're a business, right? We need to make money to survive, to make our bills and all those types of things. So understanding the value, not only numbers wise, but dollars wise, made a lot of sense. And so we knew how much API traffic now was passing through the provider. As of last week, in the last 7 days from this point of recording this talk, we had this much traffic passing through our Terraform provider. 17.7 million API calls in 7 days passed through the PagerDuty Terraform provider. I would say that's a pretty valuable and valued tool that our customers are relying on. Our users are relying on Terraform to make sure that they can configure their PagerDuty instances. The next lesson I learned was that you need to find champions. No open source project can be done alone, because when you're making changes, when I see other pull requests coming in from the community, when I see issues that are coming in and opened by the community, I can answer those. As the maintainer, as the developer on the project, the lead developer, the maintainer on the project, I can address other people's issues and other people's PRs. But what happens when I have my own pull requests? I need to have people that I can rely on, that I can reach out to, that I trust, that also can help make sure that we have a solid quality provider. And even that the new additions that we put in, that those are solid and quality and keep the provider in a solid state. And so I actually recommend having more than one. You probably want 2 or 3, because here's the deal. You could create pull requests. And I noticed this in myself. I would create a pull request and I would ask someone to review that pull request. And then I would see an issue maybe a few days later and say, oh, that's a quick pull request or a quick code change. And so I make another pull request. If I keep asking that same person over and over to review pull requests on top of their day-to-day work, they might that might burn them out a little bit. They may not respond to my Slacks when I'm sending them messages anymore. So find a couple of champions. You can rotate around those requests. You don't wear out the people inside your company, because especially in the beginning stages, as you start adopting a Terraform provider, it's going to be something that folks are working on top of their regular work, because you're experimenting with this idea of, is this something that we should be supporting? And so during those phases, I definitely needed those people to help me review those pull requests, which leads me to my next lesson. And that's setting standards. Set standards for your provider, because as you develop on that provider, you're going to have lots of features coming in. You're going to have new fields added and new resources added. But make sure that if you set a standard, that everything should be tested, that everything should maybe have the same naming conventions, that those things are met as those pull requests come through. It reminds me of a recent pull request that actually came through, where this developer really needed this new field that was new on an API endpoint at PagerDuty. And they needed this field for something that was coming up. It was very urgent. And I knew that this developer knew Terraform. I knew that they knew Terraform providers. They knew how to develop in Terraform providers. And so I had an extra level of respect in the back of my mind that they pretty much knew what they were talking about. And so when they said, hey, I added this field, it's great, the tests pass, can you please merge it? And I looked at the code, and my initial glance at everything looked right. And I pulled the code down to my machine, because that was a standard that I set for myself, that when I review something, I actually run it, because I want to see how things run and make sure, just to make sure that it actually works. So I ran this code and I ran the test. Test totally passed. Everything came back green. And I thought, all right. So I made one more look at the changes on that pull request, those changes that they were proposing for the project. And I saw the change that they were making to the code and the resource. I saw the change in the documentation, but there were no changes to the tests. So this new field being added to this resource didn't actually have a test for it. It wasn't being tested. I think you can see where this is going. So I added that field to the acceptance test on the resource. I ran the test again, and it didn't pass. Come to find out, as I dug into the issue a little bit more, and I looked at the logs and looked at the code, I realized the whole functionality that was built in for this field wasn't working at all. And so I went in, and because I saw what type of field it was a little more complex than just a straight up string field, I was able to go in myself and make the changes to make the field work. But I also left that field in the acceptance test. Set your standards and stick to them. Even if you think, these people know what they're talking about, you still want to make sure that each of your fields, each of your resources have an acceptance test testing each of those things. Not only so that when you add the new feature that it works right when I add it, but in the future, when there's other changes on that resource or other resources that are related to it, you have that test in place to make sure that this field is not affected by any of the other changes in the future. So it not only makes it solid now, but it future-proofs your fields and your resources as times go on. Another lesson we learned was about communication. This one could also be stated as setting expectations. When you work with a community of folks that are using your software, using a project that you're building and you're maintaining, they're going to come at you. The public is going to come at you with issues and pull requests that need to be addressed. As humans, we like to see movement whenever we have a concern with something or when we want something to be done. And sometimes when you're on the receiving end of those issues and receiving end of those pull requests, we might not have the bandwidth to act on things the moment they come in. But if we set a standard, we set an expectation for an amount of time that we're going to be responding to these things. Maybe internally, you can set an internal service level objective that in 5 business days, you'll make sure that you at least respond to issues, or that you'll look at the pull request and respond to the pull request. You could even go as far as setting an external SLA. You could have a service level agreement stated right in that project that says, we will respond to you in 5 business days on these open issues, on these open pull requests. I've been told that that's actually a great way of doing open source software, is by having that open and honest expectation. Not only does it let folks know that you're going to get to this issue, it gives you 5 days for them to not reach out repeatedly and saying, whoa, they didn't respond to this last night. I'm going to ping him again and ping him again, which just makes everything more stressed out. So find a time that works best for you and your organization, your bandwidth, and work with that. To be perfectly transparent, perfectly honest, for me, this is one of the lessons that I've learned, but I'm still learning, and I'm still trying to do a good job of this one. I'm not great at it. I need to be better at responding to folks in a more timely fashion, but that's key when we're learning something, right? We know where we've done well and where we can still improve. This is an area where I can still improve. So those are some of the lessons that we learned while we adopted our Terraform provider. Remember, to get buy-in, and you do that with getting data. You want to gather data on your usage so people can understand the importance of your Terraform provider. Second, you want to find champions, multiple champions. That way you don't burn them out, to help you review pull requests that you create. Third, you want to have standards that you set and that you stick to. Stick to your testing standards, or whatever standards that are important to you, to keeping your provider a quality provider that's stable and also easy to use. Fourth, you want to have a communication with your users and communication with your developers. Make sure you set expectations, communicate those expectations. Tell them that you can get to this in a certain amount of time, or it might not be in that certain amount of time. Maybe it's in a week or two. But if you have that expectation, folks are generally more happy when they work with you there. So as you've learned today, our Terraform provider at PagerDuty began in 2016 when Alexander, a member of the community, created it and continued to maintain it. In 2019 was when I came onto the scene, when I saw that there was a need for a Terraform provider to be supported by the company that it was connecting to Terraform. It wasn't my primary responsibility, so it was something I did on top of the other work that I had to do as a developer advocate. And now, in 2022, we hired our very first Terraform provider developer. So we have a developer who's going to be focused on the Terraform provider 100% of the time. All of his energies will be focused on making sure that the pull requests are reviewed, that the issues are addressed, and also that new features on the API that come through the PagerDuty API are being added to the Terraform provider for PagerDuty. So this is our journey that we've taken. We hope that you've learned some of the lessons that we did, and that by learning from the lessons in this talk, possibly you may not hit the same little speed bumps that you do in your journey. My name's Scott McAllister. I'm a developer advocate at PagerDuty. I hope, as I mentioned, that your Terraform provider development experience is as learning and as fun as mine was. Thanks for watching, and have a great, wonderful rest of your day.